Hi there. I'm what many would refer to as a conspiracy theorist, and I'm continually frustrated at when people I speak to say, "Oh, and I suppose you don't believe we went to the moon either," as if to say, "Yeah, you must be a real nutbar, mate." But please watch this before you call me that. Because in recent years I have been reading about and watching videos on 9/11, and I was mind-boggled at the mountains of evidence and overwhelming proof that would show that the American government is not telling the truth about the real events of that day. More so was my discovery that at least 60% of people I spoke to about it simply went along with the official narrative without question, and believing that anyone who dared to suggest that the US government could be capable of such atrocities must be a total tinfoil hat-wearing nutbar in the highest degree. This is an unfair label, as none of them are willing to hear or research evidence that would contradict the official story in order to make their own informed decisions independent of biased media influences. So with lavish helpings of blind faith, the American and British propaganda machines have been incredibly successful at instilling a collective anger towards Islam, along with a fear of ridicule that should anyone question the government narrative, those that do are labelled as conspiracy nutter, unpatriotic, somehow disrespectful to the dead, and just plain un-American, if you're American. Also, it seems that now the word conspiracy means something different than it did before 9/11. The connotation seems to be associated with doomsdayers types that preach bullshit from soapbox rather than any criminal activity. Because of this, many have not even bothered to look at the facts for or against for themselves. Indeed, they have joined the government chorus, vilifying legitimate, qualified questioners, and in many cases, ignorantly insisting those that do as somehow needing a straitjacket. This video, however, lists a number of conspiracies and cover-ups with strong evidence that, if revealed, would result in jail time for those involved, but only if robust, independent inquiries are held, to date which none of them have yet had the benefit. All I ask is you, that the viewer, consider the following evidence presented here and make your own decisions. If you have credible and sensible, respectful answers to any of the anomalies listed in this movie, please make those comments below, and thanks for watching, and give me a like if you do.
This video lists but some of the highly suspicious circumstances and accompanying indisputable facts relating to a number of watershed events that changed American and world history, which also almost always had devastating impacts on many other innocent countries worldwide. Despite most of these facts, governmental authoritative policy has always been to deny, no matter how strong the evidence, often countering with excuses and theories which are in some cases completely ridiculous. But it doesn't seem to matter how ridiculous a counter theory is, as long as it is one, because it will create a smidgen of doubt, and that is all that is needed to make the answer relatively acceptable, which in turn is for the most part accepted or ignored by a largely apathetic public. These denials are always accompanied by personal attacks on the whistleblower, alluding to their sanity and patriotism, and the ridiculousness of the notion that anyone could believe their trusted government would commit such atrocities, especially when that same government claim they only have the welfare of the people at heart. Often too, if the whistleblower does not denounce his or her stance, they face the threat and fear of violence to themselves and their family. They may be financially ruined, their character may undergo relentless character assassinations through the compliant media, and many have met some fatal, unexpected end. Sometimes the arrogance is such that their death can be determined as suicide when they have been decapitated or stabbed in the back, and the authorities often shrug off any public backlash with a defiant stoicism. But no matter how indisputable the facts are which prove the lies, officials continue the same blatantly false narrative, which are the stories that continue to prevail in the media today. For example, 75 to 80% of Americans believe that the JFK assassination was engineered by the state. Yet to this day, whenever the event is mentioned in the media worldwide, Lee Oswald is still credited with the shooting despite clear evidence proving otherwise. A major contributor to the spread of false information is the corporate and politically controlled media in America and in the UK in particular. CIA-run Operation Mockingbird that began in the early 1950s is clear proof that mainstream media in all forms are controlled by the state, and for anyone to think that anything is any different now is deluded. The powers that be are fully aware that whoever controls the narrative controls the populace. It must be remembered that much of the following evidence derives from eyewitness testimony, sometimes in the hundreds, such as 9/11. It also must be remembered that eyewitness testimony is enough to send a man to jail in a court of law. Sometimes a single witness with corroborating evidence is enough, and sometimes that corroboration may come from another independent witness. While some witnesses may be delusional or lie for whatever reason, not all of them do. There are more sane, honest people in the world than idiots and liars. Lastly, the facts and strong circumstantial evidence listed in this video are only a small sampling of the damning evidence that would support a conspiracy. There is much more in all cases to add to the big picture, especially 9/11. That conspiracy just keeps on giving. I urge the viewer to confirm and expand on the information here through their own research. False flag or black flag operations are a strategy where one party or government with an interest in starting a war manufactures an attack against itself while blaming the other party in order to gain public support for an overriding excuse for the use of violence against that second party. Black flag falsehoods are not new and have been used to start wars since time began, and unfortunately the Americans have a long history of starting wars using diplomatic bullshit when other countries don't comply with US interests. And once they have their excuse and reason, they'll invade with a big-ass army and start scattering buckets full of their world-saving democracy to save the people after having killed half of them during the initial invasion. Part of the reason the Americans have employed the false flag strategy so often is because their constitution does not allow any president to wage war against another nation, but such declaration of war must pass through Congress first, which is much more difficult without public support. Hence the lies. This first story, however, is one such false flag event that was started entirely by the press, and the only one in recent history that was not started by the government. The sinking of the USS Maine while it was docked in Havana Harbour in 1898 was initially blamed on an external mine planted by the occupying Spanish. But in 1976, a team of naval explosive experts re-examined the earlier evidence and concluded that the likeliest cause of the sinking was an internal explosion caused by spontaneous combustion of fuel coal stored in a bunker next to a magazine holding more than 5 tons of powder charges for the guns. This external mine theory covertly provoked a war on behalf of business interests for wealthy American sugar plantation owners, whose livelihood had been threatened by the occupying Spanish government. In this case, President McKinley, having seen the carnage of war during the American Civil War, urged the public to wait for the truth, saying, "We must learn the truth. The country can withhold its judgment and not strike the avenging blow till the truth is known." However, despite this and Congress's reluctance to declare war on Spain, a new form of yellow journalism was coming to the fore in America. One William Randolph Hearst, in his bid to monopolize newspaper sales, trumped up Spanish atrocities with exceedingly exaggerated reports of civil unrest in Cuba. The American media eventually began calling for military retaliation, claiming that the Maine was sabotaged by Spain, who saw the ship's presence in Havana as an act of provocation. Unfortunately, the only information available to the US government about the situation in Cuba was also from Hearst's media, which had gained huge public support for the military intervention, which eventually led American government to act. Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain, was the call. So this war was not initially supported by the US government, although the then Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Teddy Roosevelt, was a strong advocate. and the False Flag Act was not deliberate on their part, and they did want to seek the truth before using force. But the explosion, which was the result of an accident, was exploited by Hearst, who took full advantage of this timely mishap to advance his own agenda, to sell newspapers and to help out his wealthy American mates whose business interests were threatened by the civil unrest between the Spanish occupiers and the so-called Cuban rebels. The Spanish got kicked by the Americans, and eventually, after much civil unrest, Fidel Castro came to power, where his communist regime of terror would go on to cause much angst for the US for years to come.